The bride collapsed 3 words into her vows, and the bouquet hit the stone floor a full second before anyone in St. Bartholomew's moved. It was not a graceful fall. Eleanor Whitmore's knees buckled first, then her shoulders twisted, and the cameo brooch pinned at her collar caught the candlelight as her body folded sideways. Away from the man she was meant to marry, away from the altar, away from the life her mother had bartered for her with desperate arithmetic and a forged smile. Lord Pemberton reached for her. His fingers closed on air. But someone else was already moving. From the third pew on the left, a man who had almost not come, who had been counting the windows in the nave to pass the time, who had noticed the bride's hands trembling before anyone else thought to look. Gabriel Blackwood, the Duke of Hartwell, caught her before her skull met the flagstones. He did not think about it. His body decided before his mind caught up, one arm beneath her shoulders, the other hooking under her knees. And then he was standing with the bride in his arms, while 200 guests sat frozen in their pews, like figures in a painting no one had commissioned. "Put her down." Lord Pemberton's voice cut through the silence. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with the kind of jaw that suggested authority and the kind of eyes that confirmed it was the wrong kind. "She is my concern." Gabriel looked at him. Then he looked at the woman in his arms. Her face was the color of candle wax. A bruise circled her left wrist, purple and green, the age of it suggesting days, not hours. Her fingers still clutched the edge of her veil, as though holding on to the last decision she had been allowed to make. "She needs a physician," Gabriel said. His voice carried the flat certainty of a man who was not asking permission. "I will take her to Dr. Hendricks." "You will do no such thing." But Gabriel was already walking down the aisle, past the guests who craned and whispered, past the vicar who opened his mouth and shut it again, past Eleanor's mother, whose face had gone the specific shade of grey that meant social ruin was no longer theoretical. He carried the bride through the oak doors and into the April sunlight, where cherry blossoms drifted across the churchyard like confetti for a wedding that would not happen. His carriage was 30 paces from the church steps. His driver, Tompkins, was already climbing down from his seat, eyes wide. "Open the door," Gabriel said. "Your Grace, is she—" "Open the door, Tompkins." He laid her on the carriage seat with a care that surprised him. Her head rested against the leather, and her breath came in shallow, uneven pulls. The veil had slipped. Beneath it, her face was sharp-boned and pale, framed by dark hair that was escaping its pins, in the way hair does when the body decides appearance no longer matters. She opened her eyes. They were brown, not the warm brown of tea or honey, but the dark, clear brown of river stones. And in them, Gabriel saw something that made his chest tighten with a recognition he was not ready to name. Terror. Her fingers found his coat lapel. She gripped it with a strength that seemed impossible from someone who had been unconscious 10 seconds ago. "Don't!" Her voice was a rasp, barely a voice at all. "Don't take me back." Behind him, the church doors opened. Pemberton's boots on the stone steps, voices rising. Gabriel looked at the woman whose fingers were knotted in his coat. He looked at the church. He thought of another woman, a different bride, a different altar, a different set of vows spoken by a mouth that smiled while her eyes did not. He climbed into the carriage and pulled the door shut. "Drive," he told Tompkins. "Now, Hartwell Park. Do not stop." The carriage lurched forward. Through the window, Gabriel saw Pemberton standing at the churchyard gate, his face a mask of controlled fury. The expression of a man who has just had something taken from him and has already begun calculating the cost. Eleanor's grip on his coat loosened. Her eyes closed. She was unconscious again before they reached the village road. Gabriel sat across from her in the swaying carriage and tried to understand what he had just done. He had carried a woman out of her own wedding. He had refused to return her to her betrothed. He was, at this moment, driving her to his estate, a bachelor's estate, without a chaperone, without her family's knowledge or consent. He looked at the bruise on her wrist. He looked at the cherry blossoms caught in her hair. He did not turn the carriage around. The road to Hartwell Park wound through Hampshire's spring countryside. Hawthorn hedgerows white with blossom, fields green with new wheat, a sky so blue it seemed to be making a point. Gabriel counted the mile markers. 7 miles from St. Bartholomew's to his gates. 7 miles of road that would become, by tomorrow morning, the most talked-about distance in the county. Eleanor did not wake again during the journey. He checked her breathing twice, pressing 2 fingers to the pulse at her throat. It was there, steady if faint. She was thin beneath the wedding dress, too thin. The kind of thin that spoke not of fashion, but of meals quietly skipped, of a body that had been running on will alone, and had finally spent its last reserve. When the carriage pulled through the gates of Hartwell Park, Gabriel called for Mrs. Graves before his boots hit the gravel. The housekeeper appeared at the front door, a woman built like a wardrobe, with grey hair pinned so tightly it seemed to be holding her opinions in place. She took one look at the unconscious bride in the Duke's arms and did not ask a single question. "The east bedroom," she said. "I'll send for Dr. Hendricks. Send someone to her family as well. A message that she is safe and being tended to. Nothing more." Mrs. Graves nodded. She had served 3 Dukes of Hartwell. She knew the difference between a crisis and a scandal, and she knew this was both. Gabriel carried Eleanor up the stairs and laid her on the bed in the east bedroom, a room that had not been used since Catherine. The scent of lavender still clung to the curtains, faint and stubborn, the ghost of a woman who had planted it in every garden bed and window box, as though trying to make the estate smell like something other than stone and silence. He stepped back. Mrs. Graves moved forward with water and cloths, and the brisk efficiency of someone who has decided that competence is the only appropriate response to chaos. "Her wrist," Gabriel said from the doorway. Mrs. Graves looked at the bruise. Her mouth thins to a line that could have cut glass. "I see it, Your Grace." "Do not let anyone in who is not Dr. Hendricks." "I would not have, sir." He left the room. He went to the library, his library, the one room in Hartwell Park that still felt like his own, and poured a glass of whiskey and sat in the chair by the cold fireplace and tried to organize what had happened into something that resembled reason. He could not. He drank the whiskey. He counted the books on the shelf across from him. 47, the same number as yesterday, and the day before, and every day since Catherine died. Upstairs, a stranger slept in his dead wife's bed, and Gabriel waited for the consequences he had chosen. Eleanor woke to lavender. It was not her lavender, not the dried sprigs her sister Anna tucked into the linen chest at home, not the oil her mother dabbed behind her ears on Sundays. This lavender was embedded in the fabric of the room itself, in the curtains, in the wallpaper, in the faded cushion of the chair where a grey-haired woman sat watching her, with an expression that combined professional warmth with personal assessment. "Where am I?" Eleanor's voice came out cracked, the sound of a door that has not been opened in a long time. "Hartwell Park, miss. The home of His Grace, the Duke of Hartwell. You were brought here yesterday afternoon." The woman, Mrs. Graves, she introduced herself, spoke with the measured cadence of someone delivering news she expected to be received badly. "Dr. Hendricks examined you. He says you collapsed from exhaustion and insufficient nourishment. He has left instructions and a tonic, which I must insist you drink before you attempt to do anything dramatic." Eleanor looked down. She was wearing a nightgown that did not belong to her. Cotton, fine woven, with lace at the cuffs that spoke of care and money. On the bedside table, a glass of water, a bowl of broth, and her cameo brooch, the ivory oval her mother had pressed into her palm that morning with the words, "For courage, my darling." She did not feel courageous. She felt hollowed out, as though someone had reached inside her chest and removed the mechanism that made decisions. "The Duke," she said. "Why did he bring me here?" That is a question best directed at His Grace. Then direct me to His Grace. Mrs. Graves studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that measures not just the person, but the quality of trouble they are likely to cause. Then she nodded. Drink the broth first. I will not negotiate on this point. Eleanor drank the broth. It was good, rich with marrow and onion, the kind of broth made by a kitchen that knew what it was doing. Her stomach, which had been surviving on anxiety and weak tea for the better part of a month, received it with something close to gratitude. She dressed. Mrs. Graves brought her a day dress from somewhere, dark blue wool, slightly too large in the shoulders but clean and whole. Eleanor pinned the cameo at her collar. Her fingers trembled. She made them stop. She found the Duke in the library. It was a beautiful room and a neglected one. Shelves climbed to the ceiling on 3 walls, packed with books whose spines had not been cracked in years. Dust lay on the reading table like a second surface. The windows faced south, letting in a flood of spring light that only made the emptiness more visible. The cold fireplace, the single chair positioned as though the room's occupant had been slowly reducing his life to the smallest possible perimeter. Gabriel Blackwood stood by the window. He was tall, taller than she had registered when he was carrying her, which was an odd thought to have. Dark-haired, sharp-featured, with the kind of stillness that could be mistaken for calm by anyone who was not paying attention. Eleanor was paying attention. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his right hand opened and closed at his side, the almost imperceptible movement of his lips as he counted something she could not see. "Why did you take me?" she said. He turned. His eyes were grey, not the soft grey of morning mist, but the grey of winter sky, of lead, of something that had been bright once and was now deliberately muted. "You asked me to," he said. "I did not. You said, 'Don't take me back,' in the churchyard, your exact words." Eleanor felt the blood leave her face. She did not remember saying it. She did not remember the churchyard at all. Only the altar, the candles, Pemberton's hand on her elbow squeezing too hard. And then nothing. A gap where her body had been making choices her mind had not authorized. "I was unconscious. That does not constitute a request." "Perhaps not, but the bruise on your wrist does." Silence. The kind that has weight, that fills a room like water. Eleanor's hand moved to cover her wrist, a reflex. The same reflex she had been practicing for 2 weeks, ever since Pemberton had gripped her arm in the drawing room and told her, in the quiet voice of a man who expected to be obeyed, that she would smile at the wedding, or she would learn the consequences of not smiling. "You had no right," she said. Her voice was level. She did not raise it. Eleanor Whitmore did not raise her voice. She had learned, over 23 years of navigating a world that preferred women who accommodated, that volume was a concession. Precision was a weapon. "You had no right to take me anywhere. You are a stranger. You have placed me in a position of scandal, and I can send you home," he said. "Now, today. Tompkins will drive you." The offer sat between them like a card turned face up. Home. Home meant her mother's face, the carefully maintained disappointment, the arithmetic of survival that had led to the altar in the first place. Home meant the debts her father had left behind when he died, not heroically, not tragically, but stupidly, gambling on horses and investments that existed only in the optimistic fiction of men who preferred fantasy to ledgers. Home meant Pemberton's solicitor at the door within the hour and the marriage contract on the table, and her mother's voice saying, "Eleanor, please, for Anna, if not for me, then for Anna." Anna, 17 years old, with their father's reckless smile and their mother's fragile hope, entirely unaware of how close their family was to the kind of poverty that did not recover. "I need to write to my mother," Eleanor said, "and to my sister." "Of course. I will have paper and ink brought to your room." "I do not want it brought. I want to write it now, here." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, not approval, but a flicker of recognition, as though she had just confirmed something he had suspected, but had not wanted to be right about. He stepped aside and gestured to the desk. She sat. The chair was cold. The ink was fresh. He had been writing something himself, a letter, perhaps, the paper turned face down. She did not look at it. She dipped the pen and wrote. To her mother. I am safe. I am at Hartwell Park with the Duke of Hartwell. I need time. Do not come for me yet. I will write again soon. To Anna. Edithim. I am well. I fainted, and a kind stranger helped me. Do not worry. I will explain everything. Keep the garden watered, and read something that makes you laugh. I love you. She sealed both letters. Her hands were steady now. The broth had helped, or perhaps the fury had. The cold, clear anger that was settling into her bones like frost into stone. Not at the Duke, not even at Pemberton, but at the neat, terrible machinery of a world that could deliver a woman to a man she feared and call it duty. Mr. Harding. Gabriel spoke to the doorway, where a thin man in a dark coat appeared with the silent efficiency of someone accustomed to being summoned. See that these are delivered today, and bring me the morning's correspondence. Mr. Harding took the letters and returned within minutes carrying a single envelope. His face, as he handed it to the Duke, wore the careful blankness of a man delivering a document he had already read and wished he hadn't. Gabriel opened it, read it. His jaw tightened. What is it? Eleanor asked, because she was not a woman who waited to be told things. Lord Pemberton's solicitor. He's filing a breach of promise claim. Gabriel's voice was flat, informational, as though reading a weather report for someone else's county. He is also asserting that your removal from the church constitutes an act of, his words, unlawful interference with a lawful marriage contract. He demands either your return and the completion of the ceremony, or £5,000 in compensation. £5,000? Eleanor said it the way one says the name of an impossibly distant city. He does not want me. He wants to own me. Yes. And you? What do you want? The question landed harder than she intended. Gabriel set the letter down on the desk, precisely aligned with the edge, and was quiet for a moment that lasted 3 of Eleanor's heartbeats. She counted them, the way she counted everything when the world threatened to come apart. I want you to be safe, he said. Beyond that, I have no claim on you and no intention of making one. She studied him. The steel rose. Her father had called her that once, in a rare moment of sober clarity, watching her negotiate with a butcher who had overcharged them by 6pence. You stand so still, Ellie, he had said. So still they don't see you cutting them. Then I will stay, Eleanor said, until I understand my options. Not because you wish it, because I choose it. Understood. And I will need access to this library. For the first time, something almost like surprise crossed his face. The library. If Pemberton is filing a legal claim, then there is a legal defense. Legal defenses are built from documents, precedent, and very careful reading. Do you have Blackstone's commentaries? Second shelf, 3rd section from the left. Good. She stood. I will begin in the morning. Tonight, I would like a proper meal, a bath, and to be left entirely alone. Mrs. Graves will arrange it. Mrs. Graves already has. She is considerably more efficient than you are, Your Grace. She left the room with her spine straight and her chin lifted, and the cameo brooch catching the lamplight at her collar. Gabriel watched her go. He had the peculiar sensation of having just been examined, measured, catalogued, and filed by someone who had decided he was not yet worth the trouble of a conclusion. He sat down in his chair. He counted the books again. 47. No, 48. She had moved one. A week passed. Eleanor Whitmore did not behave like a guest. She behaved like a woman who had been placed inside a machine and was now methodically learning how it worked, not to escape it, but to decide whether it was worth repairing. She rose early. She walked the grounds before breakfast, mapping the estate with the systematic attention of a general surveying a campaign. Hartwell Park was beautiful. Even she, who had trained herself to resist beauty as a form of distraction, could not deny it. The house was Jacobean, built of honey-colored stone that caught the morning light and held it. The grounds stretched south to a river and east to a wood, with tenant farms scattered along the northern ridge. In spring, the hawthorn hedgerows frothed white along every lane, and the meadows were thick with bluebells and primrose, and the air smelled of turned earth and new grass and the particular sweetness of a world restarting itself. But the beauty was wearing thin. Paint peeled from the window frames of the east wing. The kitchen garden, which should have been planted by now, lay fallow. 2 of the tenant cottages had visible roof damage, and a fence along the northern boundary had collapsed into a ditch and been left there, like a sentence someone had started and abandoned. Eleanor catalogued these things. She could not help it. Her mind worked in lists, problems to solve, resources to allocate, inefficiencies to correct. It was the only inheritance her father had given her that was worth keeping, the ability to see a broken system and understand which piece to fix first. On the 3rd day, she found Catherine's portrait. It hung in the gallery on the 1st floor, a long, cold corridor lined with Blackwood ancestors whose expressions ranged from stern to sterner. Catherine was the exception. She was painted in a garden, lavender at her feet, wearing a white dress that seemed to dissolve into the light. Her face was small-featured and gentle, with the kind of loveliness that invites protection. Her eyes, blue and wide, looked directly at the viewer with an expression Eleanor recognized immediately. The careful smile of a woman who had been asked to appear happy and had complied. She was gentle, Mrs. Graves said from behind her. Eleanor had not heard her approach, which was impressive given that Mrs. Graves moved with the subtle grace of a wardrobe being relocated. Too gentle for this house. Too gentle for most things, I think. How did she die? Consumption, 2 years after the wedding. His Grace has not been the same since. Was she happy? Mrs. Graves was quiet for a moment. She was dutiful, she said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. Eleanor touched the frame of the portrait, cool wood under her fingertips. She wondered if Catherine had chosen the lavender because she liked it, or because it was the one thing she was allowed to choose. On the 4th day, Eleanor walked beyond the house and into the tenant farms. The first family she met was the Burrows, a couple with 4 children under 10 and a roof that leaked so badly they had moved their bed to the kitchen. Thomas Burrows removed his hat when he saw her, and spoke with the cautious deference of a man who did not know what to make of a woman in a borrowed dress who asked specific questions about drainage. "The south gutter's been cracked since September, miss. I put in a request with Mr. Harding, but—" He shrugged. The shrug contained 6 months of unanswered letters. "Since September," Eleanor repeated. She made a note in the small book she had found in the library desk, a leather-bound notebook, blank, as though someone had once intended to write in it and never found anything worth recording. She visited 3 more farms that morning. At each one, the story was the same. Repairs requested, promises made, nothing done. The tenants were not angry. They were tired, which was worse. Anger can be directed. Tiredness just spreads. She returned to the house and went to the library. The estate records were a disaster. Not fraudulent. There was no malice in the ledgers, only absence. Income recorded in one column, expenses in another, with gaps of weeks where nothing had been entered at all. The Duke's steward, Mr. Harding, had done his best, but a steward without a master's engagement is a ship without a rudder. He could keep the vessel floating, but not steer it anywhere. Eleanor was elbow-deep in a stack of quarterly reports when Gabriel found her. He stopped in the doorway. She was sitting at his desk, the desk he had not used for anything except whiskey and self-recrimination in 5 years. With her sleeves pushed to her elbows, ink on her fingers, and the ledgers arranged around her in a pattern that suggested she had already been at this for hours. "What are you doing?" "Reading your accounts." She did not look up. "Your tenants at Hawthorne Farm have been requesting a new roof since September. It is April. The Burrows family has moved their bed into the kitchen because the bedroom ceiling leaks. The fencing on the northern boundary has been down for, I'm estimating based on the wood rot, 3 months. Your drainage ditches have not been cleared since autumn, which means the spring rains are flooding the lower pastures, which means your hay yield will be down by 1/3 this year." She turned a page. "Shall I continue?" Gabriel stood very still. The kind of still that, in another man, might have been anger. In him, Eleanor was learning, it was the way he absorbed information he did not want to hear. "How long have you been at this?" "Since 9 o'clock. "It is nearly 4. "Yes, your accounts are in a state that requires 7 hours, possibly more." She finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, her voice was steady, and the ink smudge on her cheekbone somehow made her look more formidable, not less. "You have a good estate, Your Grace. Good land, good tenants, good bones. But you have been, forgive the directness, asleep at the wheel. And the people who depend on you have been paying the price." The silence between them had a different quality this time. Not the brittle silence of their first meeting, when she had been furious and he had been guarded. This was the silence of someone recognizing something uncomfortable. The particular discomfort of having a truth you have been hiding from yourself, spoken aloud by someone who has no reason to be gentle about it. "The roof at Hawthorne Farm," he said. "I will speak to Harding today." "Today, not tomorrow." "Today." She nodded, one precise dip of her chin, like a judge accepting a plea. Then she returned to the ledgers, and Gabriel left the room with the unsettling awareness that a woman he had carried unconscious from a church 6 days ago had just reorganized his understanding of his own negligence in a single afternoon. That evening, they sat at opposite ends of the long dining table and ate in a silence that was becoming, if not comfortable, at least functional. Mrs. Graves served roast lamb with mint sauce and new potatoes, and Eleanor ate with the focused attention of someone who was learning to trust food again. It was Gabriel who spoke first. The fire crackled in the grate. Spring evenings in Hampshire still carried a chill that justified flames, and the candlelight softened the angles of his face in a way Eleanor chose not to notice. "Catherine did not choose me," he said. The words came out with the cadence of something rehearsed, not for this conversation, but for the 5 years he had been having it with himself. "Her family chose me for her. The Blackwood name, the estate, the title. She was told it was a good match, and she believed it, because she believed what she was told. She was—" He paused. His right hand opened and closed on the table. "She was accommodating, to a fault." "Was she happy?" Eleanor asked. The same question she had asked Mrs. Graves. This time she wanted a different witness. She tried to be. She planted lavender in every garden bed because it reminded her of her mother's house. She redecorated the east bedroom, the room you are sleeping in, because the wallpaper was dark and she wanted something that felt like sunlight. She smiled at dinner and played the piano in the evenings and wrote letters to her sisters every Sunday. His voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man who has practiced containing something that would destroy him if he let it out in full. And none of it was enough. She was unhappy, and I knew it. And I did nothing, because the marriage had been arranged, and I believed that arrangement was the same as rightness. It is not. No, it is not. How did she die? Consumption. 18 months after the wedding. The physician said it was the cold, that Hampshire winters were too harsh for her constitution. But I think... He stopped, counted something. Eleanor saw his lips move, a flicker of arithmetic against emotion. I think she stopped fighting it. I think she decided that dying was simpler than pretending. The word hung between them. Pretending. Eleanor knew it intimately. The architecture of a life built on performance, on smiling when smiling was expected, on saying, "I am well," when wellness was a country she had not visited in months. "My father died 11 months ago," she said. She had not planned to say it, but the evening, the fire, the strange equality of two people sharing wounds they normally kept locked. It created an opening, and Eleanor stepped through it before she could stop herself. He gambled. Not on horses, that would have been almost respectable. On schemes. Investments in companies that existed only on paper. He mortgaged the house, borrowed against the land, sold my mother's jewelry piece by piece, and replaced it with paste copies she pretended not to notice. Her voice remained level. This was information, not confession. When he died, the debts were larger than the estate. Lord Pemberton offered to buy the debts, all of them, in exchange for me. In exchange for you. My mother called it a proposal. The arithmetic was simple. Pemberton erases the debts. I marry him. Anna has a future. The house is saved. She turned the cameo brooch at her collar, a gesture Gabriel was beginning to recognize as the way she steadied herself, the way she touched the one thing that was still hers. I agreed. Not because I wanted to, because the alternative was Anna's future sold at auction. And I could not. For the first time, her voice caught. A crack in the surface, hairline thin but visible. I could not let that happen to her. Gabriel looked at her across the table. The candles between them flickered. Outside, a spring wind moved through the garden, carrying the scent of lavender and turned earth. "You are not going back to him," he said. "That is not your decision to make." "No, but it is mine to support." Something shifted between them that night. Not trust, not yet, but the foundation on which trust could be built. Two people who had been shaped by other people's choices, sitting in a room full of another woman's lavender, beginning to suspect that the walls they had built were not as different as they looked. The days that followed had a rhythm. Eleanor managed the estate, not because Gabriel asked her to, but because the estate needed managing, and she was incapable of seeing broken things and leaving them broken. She organized the tenant repairs, prioritizing by severity. Hawthorne Farm's roof first, then the Burrows family's drainage, then the fencing. She met with Mr. Harding every morning at 8, and by the second week, he was deferring to her with the relief of a man who has been waiting for someone competent to arrive. Gabriel watched from a careful distance. He signed the orders she drafted. He approved the expenditures she recommended. He did not interfere, and Eleanor was beginning to understand that his non-interference was not weakness. It was a form of respect she had not encountered before. He trusted her judgment because he had seen her work, and that was a simpler, more honest currency than any she had been offered. They worked together on the legal case against Pemberton. Eleanor in the library, surrounded by law books and correspondence. Gabriel opposite her, handling the portions that required his name and title. The breach of promise claim was serious. In Regency England, such suits could ruin a woman's reputation beyond repair. But Eleanor had found a thread. "The marriage contract," she said one afternoon, holding up a document she had retrieved from the correspondence Mr. Harding kept. "It specifies that the union is conditional upon the full settlement of my father's debts by Lord Pemberton. But look here," she pointed. "The debts are listed as £4,200. And my father's debts were not £4,000. I managed his accounts for the last 3 years of his life. I know every creditor, every loan, every miserable guinea he threw away on phantom investments. The total, when he died, was £1,370. Gabriel leaned forward. The distance between them at the library table was close enough for her to smell his cologne. Cedar and something darker, something warm. And she filed that observation away in the category of things she was not yet ready to examine. "Pemberton inflated the debt," he said, "by more than 3 times, which means the marriage contract was predicated on a false figure. My mother signed it believing she owed £4,000. She owed £1,300. The contract is voidable. Can you prove it?" I need the original debt register from the moneylender my father used, a man named Stokes in London. If the figures in Stokes's ledger match mine and not Pemberton's, the contract collapses. Gabriel sat back. He looked at her, truly looked, in the way that people do when they are seeing someone for the first time, despite having shared a house with them for 3 weeks. Eleanor, with ink on her fingers and firelight on her face, and a legal argument that could dismantle the man who had bought her like livestock. "I will send Harding to London tomorrow," he said. "Today." The ghost of a smile. Today. It was the day after Harding left for London that Eleanor's understanding of the Duke shifted and broke. Lord Grenville arrived unannounced. He was Gabriel's oldest friend, a ruddy-faced man with a booming laugh and the social tact of a friendly avalanche. Eleanor liked him immediately and distrusted him in equal measure, which was her standard response to charm. She was crossing the upstairs hallway to her room when she heard them in the study below. The door was ajar. She did not intend to listen, but her name stopped her, the way a hand on the shoulder stops a person walking past an open grave. "And you've installed her in the east bedroom," Grenville was saying, his voice carrying the careful joviality of someone navigating a conversation they know is dangerous. "Catherine's room. Gabriel, be honest with me. What is this?" "She needed help. I provided it." "You carried a woman out of her own wedding and drove her to your house. That is not providing help. That is making a decision about someone else's life." "She asked me. She was unconscious." A pause. "Gabriel, I watched you after Catherine died. I watched you blame yourself for 5 years. For a marriage you didn't choose, for a woman you couldn't save, for a disease that would have taken her regardless of whether she was happy or not. And now you have found another woman being pushed into a marriage she doesn't want, and you have, what, appointed yourself her rescuer?" Silence. "You're trying to save her," Grenville said, quieter now, "the way you couldn't save Catherine. And I understand that. But she is not Catherine. She does not need you to redeem yourself through her." Gabriel's voice, when it came, was stripped of everything except honesty. "I saw her face at that altar, and I saw Catherine's face. And I could not stand there and watch it happen again." Eleanor's hand found the wall. She pressed her palm against the cool plaster and held it there, steadying herself the way a sailor holds a mast, not for comfort, but against capsizing. She did not hear the rest of the conversation. She did not need to. The architecture of the last 3 weeks rearranged itself in her mind with the brutal clarity of a room when someone lights a lamp. His non-interference, his careful distance, his precise, uninvasive kindness. None of it had been for her. All of it had been for a ghost. She was not a person to him. She was absolution. Eleanor waited until Grenville left. Then she went downstairs. Gabriel was by the window. The afternoon light fell across his face, and for the first time since she had arrived, she saw him not as the Duke, not as her reluctant host, not as the man who had caught her when she fell, but as a man trapped in a loop of his own making, circling a guilt he could not expiate, because the woman he had wronged was dead and beyond the reach of apology. "I am not your penance," she said. He turned. She saw the flinch, small, controlled, absorbed into his body the way a tree absorbs a blow from an axe. "Eleanor, I am not Catherine." Her voice was quiet and precise and absolutely devastating. The voice of a woman who had spent her life sharpening her words, because she was not permitted to raise them. "I am not a version of your guilt that you can tend and water and coax into bloom so that you can forgive yourself for a garden that died. I'm a person. My situation is my own. My debts are my own. My fear is my own. And if you cannot see me, Eleanor, the woman standing in front of you, then I will solve my own problems and I will leave this house, and you will find another ghost to care for. She did not wait for an answer. She turned and walked out of the library, with her back straight and her hands steady, and the cameo brooch at her collar like a small, gleaming shield. Behind her, Gabriel stood by the window and counted the panes of glass. 12. The same as always. But the room felt larger now, emptier, as though someone had just removed the one thing that had made it habitable. Eleanor withdrew. Not dramatically, she was too disciplined for that. She simply contracted her presence. She continued the tenant work because the tenants needed her, and she was not the kind of woman who punished bystanders for someone else's failure. She met with Harding's assistant about the accounts. She oversaw the roof repair at Hawthorne Farm, standing in the April drizzle in a borrowed coat, directing workmen with the matter-of-fact authority of someone who has decided that usefulness is its own justification. But she no longer ate dinner with the Duke. She took her meals in her room. She did not use the library in the evenings. She moved through Hartwell Park like a competent ghost, present, effective, invisible. Gabriel noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed her absence the way one notices a change in temperature. Gradually, then all at once, then unbearably. Mrs. Graves, who had the observational skills of a retired intelligence officer, said nothing for 3 days. On the 4th day, she set Gabriel's breakfast plate down with marginally more force than usual. "She is doing more for this estate in a month than I have seen done in 5 years, she said. "Whatever you have done to offend her, I suggest you undo it." "She is not offended. She is correct." Mrs. Graves raised an eyebrow. It was the most eloquent eyebrow in Hampshire. "Then be correct in return, Your Grace. Stop being sorry about a woman who is dead, and start being present for the one who is alive." She left the room. Gabriel sat with his coffee and the uncomfortable awareness that his housekeeper had just summarized his psychological architecture in 2 sentences. It was the garden that brought them back together. Eleanor found it on a Tuesday afternoon. Catherine's lavender garden, behind the east wing, sheltered by a stone wall on 3 sides and open to the south. It had been beautiful once. The bones of it were still visible. Raised beds in a geometric pattern, a gravel path, a wooden bench facing the afternoon sun. But the lavender had grown wild and tangled, competing with weeds for space, and the gravel was disappearing under encroaching moss, and the bench had one broken slat that made it look like a gap-toothed smile. Eleanor knelt in the dirt. She was wearing the blue dress, the one Mrs. Graves had given her on her first morning, and she did not care about the mud. She began pulling weeds, not violently, not with the cathartic fury of someone working out anger. She had moved past anger into something quieter and more painful. She pulled weeds because the garden was neglected, and she could not bear to see another living thing left untended. She had been at it for an hour when she heard footsteps on the gravel. Gabriel stood at the edge of the garden. He was holding a pair of gardening gloves, leather, worn, clearly Catherine's. He did not extend them. He held them at his side, uncertain, which was not a state Eleanor had seen him in before. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I'm not doing it for you." But her voice had lost its edge. Not softer, she did not do soft, but less aimed, as though she was tired of wielding herself as a weapon and would prefer, just for an afternoon, to be a person pulling weeds in a garden. He set the gloves on the bench. Then he knelt beside her and began pulling weeds from the adjacent bed. He did not speak. Neither did she. They worked in the quiet of 2 people who have hurt each other and are not yet ready to discuss it, but are willing to occupy the same space and see what grows. The lavender, freed from the weeds, released its scent into the warm spring air. It was stronger than the faded traces in the east bedroom, alive, insistent, almost aggressive in its sweetness. Eleanor breathed it in and thought, "This is not Catherine's scent anymore. It is simply the scent of a garden that someone decided to save." His sleeve brushed her arm as he reached for a root tangled deep in the soil. She did not flinch. She did not move away. She registered the warmth of the contact, a small, factual observation, filed alongside the cedar in his cologne, and the way his hands, large and capable, were surprisingly careful with the fragile stems. "Gabriel," she said. It was the first time she had used his name. It came out before she could stop it, or perhaps she did not try to stop it, and it hung in the air between them with the weight of something that could not be unsaid. He looked at her, and for the first time his eyes held no guilt, no Catherine, no ghosts. Just a man, kneeling in the dirt, looking at a woman who had called him by his name. "Yes?" She opened her mouth, closed it, shook her head. "Nothing. Just, you missed a root. There." She pointed. He pulled it. The lavender stood straighter. They worked until the sun was low. They did not discuss what had changed, but something had. A door that had been locked was now ajar, and neither of them had the will to close it. The letter from Anna arrived 3 days later, and it shattered everything. Eleanor read it standing at the breakfast table. Her face went white, not slowly, not gradually, but all at once, like a page being bleached. "Dearest Eleanor," Anna wrote, in her round, careful hand. "Lord Pemberton came to the house yesterday. He was very polite. He brought flowers for Mamma and a book for me, and he sat in the drawing room for an hour and spoke about how much he admired our family and how sorry he was for the distress of the wedding day. He said he bore no ill will and only wished for a resolution that honored everyone involved. Mamma was charmed. I was not. Eleanor, there was something in the way he looked at me. Not improper, nothing I could name, just a looking, as though he was measuring something. I am not frightened, but I am not easy either. Please write back and tell me what to do. I need to go back." Eleanor's voice was a blade. Gabriel, who had been reading his own correspondence at the other end of the table, set his letter down. He saw her face. He did not ask what had happened. He simply held out his hand for the letter. She gave it to him. He read it once. He read it again. His jaw set in a way Eleanor had come to associate with decisions being made behind a locked door. "If you go back now," he said carefully, "Pemberton gets exactly what he wants. You returned under pressure. The contract reasserted. My sister is not a chess piece." "No, she is not. Which is precisely why we must not react the way he is expecting us to react." He stood. "I will send my man, Reynolds, to your mother's house today. He will stay there, visibly, as a representative of my household. Pemberton will know he is being watched. It will buy us time." "Time for what?" "For Harding to return from London with the proof we need." Eleanor stared at him. The rational part of her, the part that had kept her family alive for 3 years on arithmetic and will, knew he was right. The part of her that was Anna's sister, that had held Anna as an infant, that had taught her to read and to ride and to laugh at things that were not funny, because laughter was the only currency they had left. That part wanted to walk out the door and not stop walking until she was standing between her sister and the man who had looked at her with measuring eyes. "1 week," she said. "If Harding is not back in 1 week, I go home." Agreed. He sent Reynolds that afternoon, a former soldier, broad-shouldered and taciturn, with the kind of presence that made men like Pemberton reconsider their approach vectors. Eleanor wrote to Anna. "A friend of the Duke's is coming to stay near the house. His name is Reynolds. He is there for you. Do not be alone with Lord Pemberton, not for any reason. I will come for you soon." She sealed the letter. Her hand trembled. She made it stop. That evening, she was in the library, not working, for once not working, simply sitting in the chair by the fire, staring at flames that blurred because her eyes were wet and she was too tired to pretend they weren't. Gabriel entered quietly. He saw her. He stopped. Eleanor did not look up. She did not wipe her eyes. She sat in the chair with tears on her face, and her spine straight, and her hands folded in her lap, crying the way a steel rose cries, silently, with perfect posture, as though grief were an appointment she was keeping with dignity. He did not ask if she was all right. He did not offer comfort. He sat in the chair beside hers, the chair that had been empty for 5 years, because there had been no one to sit in it. And he was simply there, present, a body beside her body, a silence that did not demand or expect or interpret. After a long time, minutes, maybe longer, his hand moved to the arm of her chair, not reaching, just resting, palm up, an offering without pressure. Eleanor looked at his hand, open, waiting, making no claim. She placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, his were warm. They laced together with a certainty that felt less like a choice and more like a recognition, as though their hands had been having a conversation their minds had not yet authorized. They sat like that until the fire burned low. Neither spoke. The library, which had been cold and silent for 5 years, held them in its dust and its darkness, and began, without either of them noticing, to feel like a room where someone lived. The invitation to Lady Halford's dinner arrived the next morning, and Eleanor's first instinct was to decline. Her second instinct was to accept, because declining would look like hiding, and she was not a woman who hid. She wore a gown Mrs. Graves had produced from somewhere, dove grey silk with a high neckline and the cameo brooch at the collar. "It was Catherine's," Mrs. Graves said, and then, seeing Eleanor's face, she would have wanted someone to wear it. She hated waste. The dinner was small, 12 guests, 3 courses, the kind of evening where conversation is the real menu, and everyone arrives hungry. Eleanor sat 4 places from the Duke, between a clergyman with nervous hands and Lady Halford's widowed sister, Mrs. Devereux, who had the kind eyes of a woman who collects other people's secrets, and the sharp tongue of a woman who knows when to deploy them. It was Mrs. Devereux who struck. "You must tell us, Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice pitched to carry the precise distance required for a dinner table to become an arena. "How you find your accommodations at Hartwell Park? One hears such varied accounts of the circumstances." The table went quiet. 12 forks paused. 24 eyes turned to Eleanor. She set her own fork down. She dabbed her mouth with her napkin. She took a breath so measured it could have timed a metronome. "I find them exemplary, Mrs. Devereux. The library is particularly well stocked. The grounds are beautiful in spring, and the housekeeper makes the finest broth I have ever tasted." She smiled, a smile so composed, so perfectly calibrated, that it served simultaneously as a compliment and a fortress wall. "I understand the curiosity, of course. A woman who leaves a wedding is always more interesting than a woman who stays. But I assure you, the most remarkable thing about my stay at Hartwell Park is the drainage improvements in the North Pasture. If you would like details, I am happy to provide them. They are extensive." Silence. Then a laugh, involuntary, quickly stifled, from the clergyman beside her. Then another from across the table. Lady Halford's mouth twitched. Even Mrs. Devereux inclined her head with something that might have been respect. Eleanor picked up her fork and resumed eating. The conversation moved on, redirected by her composure, the way a river is redirected by a stone. Not by fighting the current, but by being, unmovably, in the way. In the carriage afterward, Gabriel said nothing for the first 2 miles. Then, "You did not need me to defend you." "No." She looked out the window. The Hampshire night was dark and soft and full of spring sounds, an owl, a fox, the wind in the newly leafed elms. "I did not." "That was extraordinary." "That was drainage, Your Grace. I talked about drainage." "You talked about drainage in a way that made Mrs. Devereux look like a fool, without once raising your voice or being unkind. There is no word for that, except Extraordinary. She turned from the window. In the dim light of the carriage lamp, his face was half in shadow, and his eyes held something she had not seen there before. Not guilt, not guardedness, but admiration. The simple, undiluted admiration of a man watching someone do something he could not do himself. "There is a word," she said. "The word is practice. I've had a great deal of it." She said it lightly, but they both heard what was underneath. The years of practice. The dozens of dinner tables where she had absorbed insults with grace, because grace was the only weapon available to a woman without money or power, or a man willing to stand between her and the world. He reached across the darkness of the carriage and touched her hand. Not held it, touched it. His fingertips against her knuckles, brief and light. "You have me now," he said, "should you want me." She did not answer, but she did not pull her hand away. The storm came on a Thursday, a proper spring storm, the kind that turns lanes to rivers and strips the blossom from the hawthorn in white sheets. Eleanor was at Hawthorne Farm, inspecting the new roof with Thomas Burrows, when the sky opened. By the time they got the shutters latched and the livestock secured, she was soaked through. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, and her hair had abandoned its pins entirely and hung in dark ropes against her neck. She was helping Burrows's wife move the children's blankets to the dry side of the cottage when Gabriel appeared in the doorway, equally drenched, with mud to his knees, and an expression that suggested he had run the half-mile from the house. "You walked here in this?" She stared at him. "I rode. The horse had more sense and turned back. I continued on foot." "That is not a compliment to your judgment." "No, it is a testament to my concern." They sheltered in the Burrows barn while the worst of it passed. Rain hammered the roof. The smell of hay and wet earth and horse filled the close space, and the single lantern Thomas had left them threw unsteady light across their faces. Eleanor was shivering. The spring air was warm enough during the day, but soaked cotton against skin in a barn with no fire was its own kind of cold. Gabriel removed his coat, also soaked, but the inner lining was wool and still held warmth, and draped it around her shoulders without asking. His hands lingered at her collar a moment longer than the task required. "You're staring," she said. "I know. You should stop." "I should." He did not stop. She looked up at him. The rain light made his eyes silver instead of grey, and the water on his face traced the lines of his jaw and his mouth, and she was aware, fully, unavoidably, in the way one is aware of fire or of falling, that she wanted him to be closer. Not for warmth, not for shelter. For the simple, terrifying reason that his proximity had become the thing her body oriented itself around, like a compass finding north. He kissed her, or she kissed him. Later, neither would be able to say who moved first. What Eleanor remembered was his mouth on hers, and the taste of rain, and the warmth of his hand at the back of her neck, and the sound she made, a small, involuntary sound, half gasp and half surrender, that she would have been embarrassed by if she had been capable of embarrassment at that moment. She was not. She was capable only of this. His mouth, his hands, 5 weeks of restraint cracking open like a dam, and the flood of everything they had been holding back pouring through in a kiss that was not gentle, not tentative, not careful. It was the kiss of two people who had been very good at keeping themselves in check, and were finished with it. She pulled back first, her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the wet shirt. Fast, unsteady, as stripped of composure as her own. "Don't do this because I remind you of her," she said. His hands were still in her hair. His breath was uneven. His eyes, when they met hers, held nothing of Catherine. No ghost, no guilt, no redemption project. "You don't remind me of her." His voice was rough, low, scraped down to its foundation. "You are nothing like her." You are. Eleanor, you are the most terrifying, the most capable, the most... He stopped, counted something, inhaled. You are nothing like anyone. That is exactly the problem. She did not kiss him again. Not because she didn't want to. She wanted to with a ferocity that startled her. But because she was Eleanor Whitmore, and she needed to understand what she was building before she let herself live in it. When this is over, she said, when Pemberton is dealt with, and Anna is safe, and I am standing on my own ground, not someone else's, then we will have this conversation properly. I will wait, he said. I know you will. The storm passed. They walked back to the house in the clearing air, not touching, not speaking. The space between them charged with everything that had been said and everything that had not. 3 days later, Pemberton arrived at Hartwell Park. He came in a carriage drawn by matched greys, with a solicitor at his side and a document in his hand, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been planning his final move, while his opponents thought they had time. Eleanor and Gabriel were in the library when Mrs. Graves announced him. Eleanor saw the name register on Gabriel's face, a flash of something dark and controlled, like a blade being drawn inside a scabbard. Show him in, Eleanor said, before Gabriel could speak. Pemberton entered the library the way he entered every room, claiming it. He was immaculate. Grey coat, polished boots, silver hair combed back with military precision. His smile was the kind that never reaches the eyes, because the eyes have a different agenda. Miss Whitmore, Your Grace. He inclined his head with the courtesy of a man who has already won and can afford to be gracious about it. I do apologize for the intrusion, but I come bearing news that I believe requires your immediate attention. He set the document on the desk. Gabriel did not touch it. Eleanor did. It was a guardianship petition, filed with the county magistrate, citing Eleanor's abandonment of familial duty and residence in circumstances of moral irregularity as grounds for transferring legal guardianship of Anna Whitmore from her mother to Lord Pemberton as the family's primary creditor and nearest male protector of standing. The magistrate had provisionally granted the petition, pending a final hearing in 7 days. Eleanor read it twice. Her face was porcelain, smooth, white, revealing nothing. But Gabriel saw her hand tighten on the paper until the edge creased under her fingers. You will not touch my sister, she said. My dear Miss Whitmore, I have no wish to cause distress to anyone, but the law is clear. A young woman of 17, living in a household burdened by debt, with her elder sister residing, forgive me, unchaperoned, in the home of an unmarried gentleman. The magistrate felt, as I do, that proper guardianship was in order. Proper guardianship? Eleanor's voice was glacier. You mean leverage? I mean concern. Genuine concern for the welfare of a girl whose family has, through no fault of her own, placed her in a precarious position. He smiled again. The smile of a man who has found the one piece on the board that his opponent will sacrifice everything to protect. Of course, this can all be resolved very simply. Return home. Honor the contract. The debts are erased, the guardianship petition is withdrawn, and your sister's future is secured. Get out, Gabriel said. Your Grace, this is a legal matter. Get out of my house. Pemberton left. He did not hurry. Men like Pemberton never hurry. They have learned that slowness is its own form of power, that making people wait for you to leave is as effective as making them beg you to stay. When the carriage was gone, Eleanor set the document down. Her hands were shaking. She made them stop. 7 days, she said. Harding returns from London tomorrow. Gabriel's voice was controlled, but his eyes were fire. If the proof is what we believe it is, it has to be. If Pemberton inflated the debt to manufacture the marriage contract, then the contract is void. If the contract is void, his claim to be the family's creditor collapses. If his claim collapses, the guardianship petition has no standing. A chain. A chain. And we only need to break the first link. Harding arrived the following evening, road dusty and exhausted, carrying a leather case that contained a single ledger page, a certified copy from Stokes, the moneylender, witnessed and stamped. Eleanor spread it on the library desk beside Pemberton's version of the debt. The numbers were not close. They were not even in the same country. Stokes's ledger, £1,370 at 8% interest. Pemberton's claim, £4,200 at 20%. He tripled the principal and doubled the interest, Eleanor said. Her voice was calm in the way that deep water is calm, still on the surface and moving powerfully underneath. He bought my father's debt for £1,300, rewrote it as £4,000, presented the forged figure to my mother, and used her panic to secure a marriage contract that was, from its inception, built on fraud. The magistrate will void the contract, Gabriel said. The magistrate will void everything. The contract, the breach of promise claim, the guardianship petition. All of it is predicated on a debt that, in its true amount, my family can repay. Not easily, but repay. She looked at him. I want to present this myself. Eleanor, he tried to buy me. He threatened my sister. I will stand in front of the magistrate and I will take him apart. And I will do it with the same composure he used when he walked into this library and told me he owned my family. Gabriel studied her face. He saw the steel rose in full armor, the stillness, the precision, the absolute, unshakable certainty of a woman who has identified her enemy and chosen her ground. I will be there, he said. I know, but you will not speak for me. I would not dare. The hearing was held in the town hall. The magistrate, Sir Edmund Carlyle, was a practical man with reading spectacles and a dislike of wasted time. The room was small, wood-panelled, smelling of old paper and lamp oil. Pemberton sat at one table with his solicitor. Eleanor sat at the other with Harding. Gabriel sat in the gallery, 3 rows back, his hands folded, his eyes on her. Pemberton's solicitor spoke first. The argument was polished, rehearsed, built on the assumption that documents do not lie, and that a woman who leaves her wedding has forfeited the right to be believed. Then Eleanor stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture. She stood at the table with the ledger pages arranged before her, and she spoke the way a surgeon operates, with precision, with economy, with the absolute confidence of someone who knows exactly where to cut. Sir Edmund, the breach of promise claim filed by Lord Pemberton is predicated on a marriage contract. The marriage contract is predicated on a debt. And the debt... She placed the 2 documents side by side on the magistrate's desk. Is a fiction. She walked him through it, point by point, number by number. The moneylender's original figures beside Pemberton's inflated version. The interest rate discrepancy. The principal that had been tripled. The dates that did not align, the signatures that had been witnessed by men who, as Harding's London investigation had discovered, were employees of Pemberton's own household. She did not look at Pemberton. She did not need to. She was speaking to the magistrate, to the record, to the law itself. And every word she said was a brick being removed from the wall Pemberton had built around her family. Why, Lord Pemberton? She turned to him now. Her voice was quiet, the quietness of someone who has been asking questions all her life and has learned that the quieter you ask, the louder the answer. Why does your ledger show £4,000 when the original shows £1,300? He did not answer. Why was the interest calculated at 20% when my father's contract with Mr. Stokes stipulated 8%? Silence. Why did the witnesses to your version of the debt turn out to be your own footman and your own stablemaster, neither of whom were present at the original transaction? Pemberton's solicitor began to speak. Sir Edmund raised a hand. Why, Lord Pemberton? Eleanor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and the room leaned in to hear her. Why, specifically?
Did you inflate a debt of £1,300 to £4,000 in order to force a woman into marriage? What kind of man manufactures a crisis to buy a wife?
The room was silent. Pemberton's face had gone the color of old paper. His solicitor was staring at the documents as though they had personally betrayed him. Sir Edmund removed his spectacles. He cleaned them. He put them back on. "The guardianship petition is dismissed," he said. "The breach of promise claim is dismissed. I am referring the matter of the debt discrepancy to the county prosecutor for investigation into potential fraud. Miss Whitmore, you are free to go." Eleanor gathered her papers. Her hands were steady. Her face was steady. Everything about her was steady, because she had been steady her entire life, and she would not stop now. Not when stopping meant showing Pemberton that he had ever had the power to make her shake. She walked out of the town hall without looking back. Outside, the April air was warm and bright and smelled of the lime trees that lined the high street. Eleanor walked 10 paces from the door, stopped, and pressed both hands against the stone wall of the building. Her knees were trembling. Her whole body was trembling. The delayed shaking of a system that has held itself together under enormous pressure and has finally been given permission to let go. Gabriel was there. He had come out behind her, close enough to catch her if she fell, again, but not touching, not presuming, waiting. "I have never seen anything like that," he said. "I have been doing that my entire life." Her voice was unsteady now. The composure was cracking, and what was underneath was not weakness, but the enormous, exhausting effort of a woman who has been strong for everyone else and has never once been allowed to be strong for herself. Fighting men like him, proving things that should not need proving, defending ground that should not need defending. I just never. She pressed her palms harder against the stone. I never had anyone standing behind me before. He stepped closer, not into her space, beside it, present without claiming. "I love you," he said. It was not grand. It was not a declaration from a balcony or a whispered confession by candlelight. It was said the way one says a fact that has been true for some time and has only now been given its name. Quietly, certainly, the way you say the sky is blue or the river runs south. A thing observed, a thing confirmed. Eleanor turned. Her eyes were wet. Her face was a battleground between the composure she had maintained for 23 years and the feeling that was dismantling it, brick by careful brick. "I know," she said. Then, because she was Eleanor, "I love you too, but I will not be your rescued bird. I will not be a woman who was saved and is grateful. I will be your partner, your equal, your challenger, your inconvenient conscience. Or I will be nothing. I know. I mean it, Gabriel. I will reorganize your estate. I will argue with your solicitor. I will tell you when you are wrong, and I will not apologize for it. And I will make your housekeeper's life difficult, and I will tend Catherine's garden, not because she was your wife, but because the lavender deserves better than neglect. I would not have it any other way." "Good." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, an inelegant gesture, entirely unlike her, entirely perfect. "Then you may court me properly, beginning with an explanation of why you have had my cameo brooch for 5 weeks and not returned it." The surprise on his face was genuine. "How did you— I am a woman who managed a bankrupt estate for 3 years, Your Grace. I notice when things are missing." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew it. The cameo, ivory oval, gold frame, her mother's face painted in miniature on the front. He had kept it since the church, since the moment she had fallen, and it had clattered to the flagstones, and he had picked it up without thinking, the way you pick up something precious that someone has dropped. He had opened it. Inside the back cover, where the ivory was smooth and blank, he had— she saw it as he placed it in her palm— had a single word engraved. Eleanor. Not his name, not Hartwell, not Blackwood. Hers. "This is yours," he said. "It was always yours. I simply kept it safe until you were ready to take it back." She closed her fingers around it. The metal was warm from his pocket, from being carried close to his body for 5 weeks, and the warmth moved through her hand and into her chest, and settled there like a lamp being lit in a room that had been dark for a very long time. "Marry me," he said. "Not because I saved you, not because I owe a debt to a ghost. Marry me because you reorganized my entire estate in a month, and I'm terrified of what you will do to the county if I let you loose unsupervised." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed, truly laughed. Not the polite exhale of social function, but the real sound, startled out of her, since before her father died. It surprised them both. "Yes," she said, "on my terms. I would expect nothing else." They were married in the chapel at Hartwell Park on a morning in late May, when the hawthorn was still in bloom, and the lavender in Catherine's garden had burst into its first full flowering of the season. Anna stood beside Eleanor, holding a posy of wildflowers she had picked from the meadow that morning, her face bright with the particular joy of a 17-year-old who has just been released from a threat she was too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel in her bones. Lady Margaret Whitmore sat in the front pew and wept. Not the performative tears of a society mother at a successful match, but the genuine, messy weeping of a woman who had almost lost everything, and had been saved not by a duke, but by a daughter who was braver than she deserved. Eleanor's hand did not shake, not when she spoke her vows, not when Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, not when she turned to face the small congregation, Mrs. Graves, Mr. Harding, Lord Grenville, the Burrows family, a dozen tenants who had asked to come and been told yes, and saw, for the first time in her life, a room full of people who were not watching her with assessment or expectation, but with something simpler and rarer. They were watching her with happiness. The cameo brooch gleamed at her collar. Inside it, her name. She had chosen this altar. She chose to stay. 6 months later, the library at Hartwell Park was unrecognizable. The dust was gone. The curtains had been replaced. Eleanor had chosen green velvet, the color of the Hampshire hills in late summer, and Gabriel had not argued because he had learned, early and wisely, that arguing with Eleanor about interior decisions produced the same result as arguing with Eleanor about everything else: defeat, graceful and inevitable. Books lay open on every surface, not for show, but because people were reading them. Anna, who had moved to Hartwell Park in June and was flourishing in the way that 17-year-olds flourish when they are safe and fed and surrounded by books, was curled in the window seat with a novel, her stockinged feet tucked beneath her. Mrs. Graves had left a tea tray on the side table and a pointed note about lunch being at 1 o'clock sharp. No exceptions, not even for dukes who forget to eat when they are watching their wives work. Eleanor sat at the desk, her desk now, though she still thought of it as his, the way you think of a country you have adopted as home, but whose accent you will never quite lose. The estate accounts were spread before her. Hartwell Park was, for the first time in 6 years, operating at a profit. The tenant roofs were repaired, the drainage was clear, the north pasture was producing hay again, and Thomas Burrows had named his newest calf Eleanor, which she pretended to find ridiculous and secretly considered the highest compliment of her life. Gabriel entered the library. He paused in the doorway. A habit now, this pausing, as though he needed a moment to absorb the fact that the room was occupied, that the house was alive, that the silence had been replaced by the particular, productive noise of people who are doing things that matter. "You're counting," Eleanor said without looking up. "Windows. 3 visible from this angle." "And?" He crossed the room. He stood behind her chair and placed his hands on her shoulders, and the warmth of his palms through the wool of her dress was the same warmth she had felt in the barn during the storm, except that now it did not have to end. Now it was daily and dependable, and hers. "And I only see one thing," he said. She turned in the chair. She looked up at him. This man who had caught her when she fell and carried her out and never brought her back. Not because she was fragile, not because she needed saving, but because he had recognized, in the 3 seconds between her collapse and the stone floor, that she was someone worth the scandal. The lavender bloomed outside the window. Catherine's garden, Eleanor's garden now, was pruned and thriving and fragrant in the September sun. The bench had been repaired. A new path had been laid, gravel pale as bone, leading from the library door to the first lavender bed. Eleanor touched the cameo at her collar, her name inside it, her choice on her finger, her sister safe in the window seat, her estate, their estate, running on numbers that added up. She had fainted at the altar. A duke had caught her. He had never brought her back. And she had built, from the wreckage of someone else's plan, a life that was entirely her own. If you have ever stayed in a place longer than you planned, not because you were trapped, but because someone made it feel like the place you were meant to be, then you know what Eleanor found at Hartwell Park. It was not rescue. It was recognition. The quiet, stubborn recognition that some people do not need to be saved. They need to be seen. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell me. What was the moment you knew Eleanor would win? Was it the library, the magistrate's office, or the lavender garden? I read every single comment, and they mean more than you know. If you are new here, welcome to the fireside. Subscribe and join us. There is always room by the fire, and the next story is already